County Civil War Roundtable for 2001. My name is Matt Borders. I'm the president of the Roundtable, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you this evening our speakers. We're going to have Jim and Suzanne Gindelsberger speaking on a great topic tonight, So You Think You Know Antietam. And real quick, I just wanted to tell a brief story about the Gindelsbergers and their book, because this was actually one of the books that I would recommend continuously when I worked at Antietam National Battlefield, first as a ranger and later actually in the bookshop. We would have folks coming in looking for those little stories, the human interest stories, more information that's kind of off the beaten path, and I would actually turn to this book. So this is going to be a great presentation this evening, and we welcome you once again to the Frederick County Civil War Roundtable. Jim?
Thank you, Matt. Can you all hear me in the back there? All right? Don't need the mic?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming out on this rainy night. I know there's better things to be doing when you're outside in the rain, but I think we'll get through it. I'm going to carry the ball tonight. My wife loves to do the research, but she's not big on standing up in front of crowds and speaking, so I'm going to represent the family tonight, but I do always want to thank her for the help she gave me on doing this. So, as Matt said, we're talking about So You Think You Know Antietam, but I want to focus, first of all, on the subtitle, America's Bloodiest Day. I'm kind of speaking to the choir here because I know most of you have probably been to Antietam. Anybody who has not been to Antietam? Okay. Okay, I thought that was something. America's Bloodiest Day, which it really was, 23,000 casualties in 12 hours. So that's a big number, hard to grasp it. So let's put it into a little bit of perspective. D-Day, Normandy, about the same amount of time, 12 hours, 6,000 to 7,000 casualties, American casualties. So we're looking at 3 to 4 times as many casualties at Antietam as there were in Normandy. And if you work the math back, I'm an engineer, so I'm kind of a nerdy guy like that. I did that. It works out to about 1 casualty every 2 seconds for 12 solid hours. Just imagine that kind of a situation. I just have trouble grasping that, actually. Okay, this is just a Sherrick Farm. I'm just using a few slides to go through here for an introductory part, and then we'll get into some specifics. Suzanne and I love Antietam for a number of reasons. One, it's just a pristine battlefield. It's almost identical to what it was when the soldiers were here fighting. We also like the size. We like Gettysburg too, but Gettysburg is so large. There's so much going on in so many different places at the same time. It's very hard for a novice particularly to grasp what's happening and what's going on. We've been there probably 6 times or 8 times a year for 25 years, and we learn something every time we go. Here we can come down and spend a day or a weekend, and you can grasp it right away. The person who really doesn't know a whole lot about the battle can leave with a pretty good idea of what took place. We had basically, wrong direction, it's 3 individual battles that roll into one major battle, and we'll talk about those a little bit here. This is a crude map, but it kind of gets the point across. The first part of the fighting took place up in that northern part of the map there. Took place in the morning, started about dawn actually, and ran several hours, and then moved down to the center part, the sunken road. And then in the third part of the battle, or the third battle of the overall battle, was down here at the Burnside Bridge. So you can see 3 separate individual battles that you can study one and get familiar with it and move to the next one and then move to the third one and have a pretty good idea of what happened at Antietam. And we like that. David Miller's Cornfield, the Cornfield. A lot of cornfields at Antietam, but this is the Cornfield. Slaughter pen, changed hands several times. One of the more poignant stories of Antietam, and you may have heard this one, is about young Charlie King, 13-year-old drummer boy from Pennsylvania, back in the woods, in a relatively safe position. and an artillery shell burst above him, and he was mortally wounded, 13 years old. If you can imagine sending a 13-year-old boy off to battle and not seeing him come home. That's what happened in the King family. He was the youngest fatality here at Antietam, probably one of the youngest fatalities in the entire war. And that took place at the Cornfield. Clara Barton, her monument, we have an affinity, Suzanne and I, for Clara Barton because we live in Johnstown. And she was very instrumental in the relief effort in the 1889 flood. It was the first major effort for the Red Cross that she had just organized. My grandfather was a survivor of that, and along with 2 other floods after that, so we kind of like Clara a little bit. But Clara came at the perfect time. She was the proverbial guy in the white hat coming in on the horse at the right time in the Western movie. The doctors at that point were now relegated to using corn husks to treat the wounds and to bandage things up. They had run out of bandages, and she and her volunteers came with wagon loads of supplies, so enabled the surgeons to do their job with the equipment they should have had in the first place. Just didn't have enough of it. You can see the Red Cross right there. Load up a little bit. The Red Cross on the monument is made up of bricks. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's made from the chimney of the house where she was born. So there's some symbolism there as well. She had a close call, some of you may be aware. As she was treating a wounded man, a bullet went through her sleeve and didn't touch her, but it actually struck and killed the man she was treating. So pretty tight quarters. And there are a lot of stories like that on these battlefields. All the battlefields have stories like that, it seems. This is one of our favorite, I guess you could say, monuments. It's not really a monument. It's the 90th Pennsylvania. And we like it because it's not so much a monument. It almost looks like you walked into an encampment, just the way it's set up. This is not the original. The original was made by the soldiers from the 90th Pennsylvania with actual cookpot and guns and so on. Over the years, of course, that deteriorated, and I believe about 25 or 30 years ago, Matt, am I close? Correct me on these if I'm wrong, by the way. It's always dangerous speaking in front of a ranger. Ancestors of the 90th Pennsylvania veterans went to a friend of ours, Gary Castile, you may be familiar with, who does a lot of sculpting, and he put this together, and it's supposedly an exact duplicate of the original that the veterans put up there. Suze, do you want to tell about your story? I'm going to make her talk anyway, because she has a favorite story associated with this. I'm going to put her on the spot.
He knows this was one of the favorite things of mine that happened at Antietam that day. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Need a mic?
We came across this, and as usually happens, I get involved in things and wander off while Jim's doing real stuff. And I came across this, and it was before Jim got there, and I was amazed. This site was covered with orange monarch butterflies. They were everywhere, hanging off the branches, off the kettle, on the rocks. It was just a sight, and it was just that one area. And I happened to think, butterflies are a form of life, a life ever after, or remembrance, and it just was very emotional to me. That's my story.
You done good.
And I didn't have a camera.
A little close up on the cookpot, you can see the bottom part of it there. It says it was a hot place. I think that could have been anywhere on the battlefield that day. When you think of 23,000 casualties, there was no safe place to take refuge. And we're looking at the 4th U.S. Artillery, Battery B, and it also has a very poignant story of a very young soldier. The battle was getting intense. The Confederates were getting closer and closer, and the captain of the battery was badly wounded, had to be taken to the rear for medical treatment. And a young man named Johnny Cook went with him, 15 years old, a bugler, went with him back to the rear of the lines, made sure his captain was being taken care of, and then came back out to make sure the lieutenant knew that the captain was not going to be coming back and he was in charge. When he got out there, he saw how close the Confederates were to overrunning the battery. Most of the artillery crews had been casualties by that point. So he began gathering up ammunition, loading a cannon, and firing it. One person doing this, 15 years old. If you've ever watched them do an artillery demonstration, you know it takes more than one guy to do it. And he did it all. And the assault was beaten back, not just because of Johnny Cook, but he held a major part in it. And when the battle was, or when the fighting was done and the assault was over, there were Confederates within 10 feet of the mouth of the cannon. So that shows how close they came to overrunning the battery. Johnny Cook became a 15-year-old Medal of Honor recipient, if you can imagine that. 15 years old. This is the 125th Pennsylvania, and the reason I have it over on the left, it's not by accident. The first time I saw it, I thought, I've seen this monument before. And I did some thinking, and there it is. It's the 13th Massachusetts at Gettysburg, up on Oak Ridge, on that little loop road that goes down to Mummersburg Road, if you're familiar with it. Different sculptor, but same casting. And I have no doubts that there's more than those two somewhere, and some of the other battlefields as well. But we're going to talk about the 125th flag bearer, and that was George Simpson. And he was not the first one, by the way. Flag bearers were guys that kind of walked around with a target on their back. Not many of them made it through the whole war for obvious reasons. And George Simpson was not the first flag bearer that day. He was the fourth or fifth one, I believe. Picked up the flag when the flag bearer ahead of him went down. And I've often thought about this. You know you're not going to survive, and you still do that. And it just kind of boggles my mind a little bit there that it's a suicide mission, and you know it's going to happen. And he died. He was killed. His brother was wounded, but he survived. But the flag that he was carrying, he fell across it, of course, and all bloodstained. So it was saved and used at the consecration and the dedication of this monument. His sister actually was part of the dedication group that dedicated the monument to her brother. But that's George Simpson. Ever see this place? This is kind of a symbol of Antietam, isn't it? If it's not the most famous place on the battlefield, it's one of them. The Dunker Church, German Reformed, Baptist, I believe, did dunking as a form of their baptism process. And of course, that led to the name Dunkard. Very plain, as you can see, no stained glass windows, no steeple, almost looks like a house. Jackson used it as his headquarters for a while, became an aid station after the battle, embalming station. And it looked very serene right now, but in 1862, it kind of looked like this. And you've seen this picture, it's an iconic picture. Incidentally, tomorrow's the anniversary. Everybody aware of that? 159 years tomorrow. But that's what the church looked like. Had a great deal of battle damage. Deteriorated over the years. It was knocked down in a windstorm in the 1920s, I believe, and was rebuilt. But the story that's associated quite often with the Dunkard Church is of the Union soldier who stole the Bible. If you can imagine stealing a Bible. And he took it home with him. It was a souvenir of Antietam. And he kept it until his death, and it made its way back to the Park Service. I guess it's still there, Matt? As far as I knew it was. But it did make its way back, and the Park Service now has it, and it's part of their possessions as well. But that's the Dunkard Church, what it looked like and what it looks like now. This is the inside. If you've never been in, you might want to take a look at it. It's very plain, very simple, no altar. Everybody was in straight back pews, no cushions, men and women separated, totally very, very plain and very simple. And you can see no window dressings, nothing on there, but that's the inside, and it's a nice place to visit and just sit and kind of think a little bit about what went on around you outside. Texas Brigade. You can always spot a Texas monument because they're all, well, not all of them, but most of them are the same. There's about 14 or 15 of them on different battlefields. Pink granite. The inscriptions are different, of course, but the size, the shape, and everything, all the same. Texas Brigade is probably one of the most ill-fated groups on the battlefield. Not probably, they were. 82% casualty rate. Company F, I believe it was, had 0 available for the next day's roll call. Company A had 1. Company C had 2 or 3. So you can see the way the group was totally decimated. When the battle was over, the Union soldiers went across the battlefield and they came across the Texas Brigade flag, and they counted, and it was in the battle reports in the OR, there were 13 dead Texans within arm's reach of the flag staff. So they all had the same idea, and they died for their flag. So that's the Texas Brigade. They did get another flag. It was a duplicate of the one that was captured at Antietam. The only difference was it had a black border around it as a commemoration of the 82% casualty rate. This is your monument, Maryland. Probably the largest monument on the battlefield in bulk, maybe not in height. The Philadelphia Brigade's taller, but very ornate, very pretty a monument. It's been rededicated 2 or 3 times. I think early 2000, 2005, 2006, something like that was the last time. President McKinley, who was a veteran of Antietam, fought at Antietam, presided over the original dedication. The thing that's unique about this, Maryland being a border state, had regiments on both sides. There were 6 Union regiments, 2 Confederate. So at the dedication, there were Union generals and Confederate generals as well, supposedly buried the hatchet, so to speak. You can see right here, it's a bas relief. There's 4 of them at each of the 4 compass points, I guess you could say, going around the monument. This is one of them. They all had some symbolism with one of the regiments from Maryland. This one's the 2nd Maryland on their assault on Burnside Bridge. And the other 3 they're all different, all unique. And if you haven't seen them, they're worth taking a look at. Very interesting. This is Philadelphia Brigade I just mentioned. Philadelphia Brigade also was hit very hard, not at 82%, but they lost over 500 men in about a half an hour. Not that that's minimalized, but that's a lot less than the Texas Brigade. But they put their monument up and also had Confederate and Union generals there, even though there were no Confederate soldiers involved with this. Again, showing the unionization of the country after the after the war was over. Once the monument was up, the veterans of the Philadelphia Brigade kind of looked at each other and said, now what are we going to do with all this land we bought? They had 11.5 acres. And they decided to make a public park out of it, which it still is, and very easy to get to, and very pretty area, and very serene, nice place to go and just kind of walk around and look at things. You can see the monument up in here, right there. Robert E. Lee had his headquarters in this little oak grove here. It's out on the other side of the old railroad station, out in that general area. I don't know what the name of the area is, but it was a little oak grove. He did all his strategy and tactics from there, gave these orders. This is a close-up of the plaque that's on the monument. A little different weather conditions, but you can see it's where General Lee did his operations from that point. This is the Pry Farm. part of this group, part of the National Museum. They have this one in the Clara Barton Museum and the Pry Farm. Served as McClellan's headquarters and also as a field hospital, which is why it's part of the National Museum. Officers were treated in the house. The enlisted men were treated in the barn, which is kind of over here. And they were there for several months. General Richardson, who had been mortally wounded, was treated here for 2 months and before he passed away. Lincoln came, visited during that span as well. So this, oh, one thing that was kind of interesting, you can't see it on here, but there's a trapdoor in the roof. And McClellan would go up to the roof and kind of see what was going on in the battle as well as he could see with all the smoke. Gave him an idea of how things were progressing. Kind of a neat place. This is the sunken road, or as it became known very quickly, the Bloody Lane. It was a road that connected Boonesboro and, was it Haverstown? I believe.
It goes around Charlotte.
Okay. Yeah, turnpikes, right. And was used by farmers. It was worn down. It was actually all that same level at the very beginning. But it made a great defensive position for the Confederates. They stayed down below the top part of the embankment and waited until the Union came up over the rise and got within point blank range, basically, and the fight was on. A couple hours, 5,000 casualties. Irish Brigade came in and took heavy casualties as well. And it was the proverbial story that you could walk from one end to the other without stepping on the ground. And it seems to be at every battlefield. There's one place like that, and this was the place for Antietam. And its official name was Sunken Road, but it became better known as Bloody Lane. This is what it looks like today, as you know. Much nicer, much quieter, much cleaner. You see the tower in the background and just a real nice setting for a nice walk. This is the tower, put up by the War Department after the war was over, strictly for tourists. It was set up so the tourists could really get a good view of the battlefield in all directions and kind of get a feel for what was taking place at any given time. The roof wasn't on originally. It did go on later on. But you can see the Irish Brigade monument right here. This is Richardson's point where he was mortally wounded. The picture on the right, I can't really tell you much more than I told you about the other one. We just put it in for atmosphere. We went down, it was late in October, and we got into some snow squalls and got a nice snow fog. So it made a nice picture. I just thought I'd throw it into. It was a good atmosphere for October with Halloween and everything. We thought we ought to be here at night, see, midnight or something, see what it looked like. But that's the tower, the observation tower. Had nothing to do with the battle itself. This is 132nd Pennsylvania, and it sits on the battlefield, or on the side of the sunken lane. They were emphasizing the color bearer as well. You can see the shaft of his flag is broken off. Happened quite often. Artillery shell or a bullet would hit and shatter that shaft. And they commemorated that by putting it at the base of his feet where it would have fallen. I don't know who this particular color bearer was. They don't have him named. But it kind of represents all the color bearers and all the regiments on both sides. 132nd had a little bit of a rough time, not only with the Confederates, but they had to contend with bees as they were coming across the Rowlett farm. An artillery shell landed right in the beehive section, and the bees took offense with that. And the 132nd men were not only dodging bullets, but were swatting at bees the rest of the way over to the sunken road. So they had a rough time, and it it showed up in a lot of the reports and a lot of their diaries. They all seemed to think about the bees more so than the battle that they were in.
Can you go back to that last picture? That circle on the right.
Yes,
What does that show?
right here. That one?
Yeah.
Okay, that's just showing the shaft that would have been connected right there.
Oh, okay.
Okay? Anybody, I should have said at the beginning, if you want to ask questions as we go along too, that doesn't bother me a bit. We can hold them till the end or you can jump in because as you can see, I don't have any particular flow here. We're just winging it. Burnside Bridge. 4 different views. A small pocket of Georgia soldiers up here on the hillside held off the entire Union Army for several hours. Several assaults on the bridge. Many question why Burnside didn't just ford the creek, but we won't talk about that. The Union was coming in either down this road or down off this hillside. This is the same road as this, just a different angle, coming toward the bridge. And it took place at the late part of the afternoon, toward the end of the fighting. Several assaults on the bridge, all unsuccessful, held off by that small group of Georgians. You can see right here where the Georgians were looking down. This is the same road we just talked about right along here, and the hillside coming down. Georgians had a good vantage point, and it didn't take many of them to defend that position, and they held it for several hours until these 2 regiments came along, the 2 51s, or 251st, 51st Pennsylvania, 51st New York. On the Union side, again, we're looking up that hillside I showed you, coming down here. The 2 of them jointly assaulted the bridge and were able to take the bridge. But the interesting human interest story that went with that, 51st Pennsylvania had done something, and I'm not sure what it was. Matt, maybe you can fill in on that, to raise the ire of Colonel Edward Ferrero, and he took away their whiskey ration as punishment, which you can imagine it didn't sit well with the men of the regiment. But he called the men together, the officers, and he said, "Can you men take that bridge?" And it wasn't a question so much as a challenge. And they immediately saw a bargaining chip. And they said, "Well, we can probably take the bridge if we could get our whiskey back." And he agreed to it. He said, "If you take the bridge, you get your whiskey." They did, and he did. They took the bridge with the 51st New York, and it wasn't just those 2, of course, with others as well. And Ferrero gave them back their whiskey, so everybody was happy. And they did take the bridge because at that point, the Georgians were pretty much out of ammunition or very low on ammunition and had to withdraw. So their timing was good as well. You can see the bridge in the background here and this wall. And this wall was there at the time, so it provided some cover for them. And after it was over, it served as a temporary grave site. You can't really see it well on that. Their grave markers are down here. I have a blow up here, but you can see it. You can see grave markers there. They were made from the planks of the bridge. You work with what you have, and that's what they used to put that. The bodies have all been disinterred and moved out now, as far as we know. But the wall is still there, and you can see where this took place. And again, in reference to the bridge, you can see the bridge is right back there, so it's not that far away from the bridge. This is the John Otto farm. This was a scene of pretty fierce fighting late in the day. A lot of it took place in his cornfield. I don't know what it was about cornfields at Antietam, but it seemed to attract both armies. The Otto farm was kind of the end part of the daily battle. You can see the bricks in the farm there, or in the hot farmhouse. They were made on site. They were made at the farm. Some of the bricks were used also in the Dunker Church. This became a hospital as well. Family wasn't there during the battle, but when they came back, their farm was pretty well decimated. Crops were all trampled, and found that their curtains and linens and so on were used as bandages, and amputated limbs and so on, all the bad parts of being around a field hospital. And that was typical of all of them as well. It wasn't just the auto farm. This is the Burnside Sycamore, the witness tree. Of course, it was a sapling at that time. Sits at the edge of the Union side of the bridge. I've often wondered what that's going to look like when that tree dies and they take it apart. Kind of interesting to see what they get. They'll do an archaeological study on it, I'm sure. They always do when these witness trees eventually die, which they do. That tree went up, he just discarded. They'll probably make it into canes and walking sticks and pen sets and so on, but it'll be preserved in some manner. But it's going to have some interesting things in there. I hope I'm still alive when it happens. I'd like to see it. The lodge, this is the entrance to the cemetery. A couple years after the battle was over, of course, all these casualties, all the fatalities anyway of the casualties, were field buried. They were buried pretty much where they were killed or where they died. And they're very shallow graves. You can imagine they're not going to spend a lot of time digging graves. So they're only a couple feet deep. And in many cases, they were starting to be exposed. And you've seen the famous picture from Spotsylvania, of the fellow with the wheelbarrow and all the bones and the skulls and everything in it. That was fairly common. And the decision was made, let's have a cemetery and give these people a proper burial. And they started bringing them in from not just Antietam, but probably from Monocacy and even Manassas, as far away as Manassas, and bringing them in. And there was no distinction between Union or Confederate. And the townspeople didn't take that too kindly. They didn't want any Confederates buried on their property. So it became a bone of contention for a considerable time. It went back and forth. And finally, the problem was solved when the South said, hey, we can't raise the money to help build that cemetery anyway, so we'll bring the Southerners down. Many of them went to Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond. Many went to family cemeteries. But it became a Union cemetery. I'm not saying there are no Confederate soldiers in there, because the odds are pretty good that some of those that were unidentifiable could have been Confederates. But for the most part, it's a Union cemetery. Is it still active, Matt? I don't know if they use it for... I didn't think it was, but I think the last burial was the fellow that was on the Cole. Couldn't think of it. Yeah, I was thinking Kursk. That's another country. The Cole. Yeah, I think he was the last one, right? Correct. I thought. But that's the lodge. It's used as an administrative building. It's been used as a superintendent's home. Had several uses. It's probably one of the nicer entrances I've seen in any of the national cemeteries, for what that's worth. Old Simon, private soldier. A little closer view of him. Old Simon was the first monument in the cemetery. It's a centerpiece. You can't tell from the photo, but his eyes are looking directly north, looking toward home. It was not made initially for the cemetery, although that was the plan to take it there. It was built for the Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia in the 1880s, and stood there as a symbol of the Civil War. When the Centennial Exhibition was over, they cut him in half, right about there at the belt line, to transport him to Sharpsburg. Put him on two separate rail cars, and on the way up, a kind of undignified trip for the upper part of the statue, he rolled off and went into the Potomac River. So it delayed the dedication for a while, for obvious reasons. They brought him back out, fished him out, and brought him to Sharpsburg and put him back together, and you could barely see the seam. If you look real close, you might be able to pick it up. You can't on the picture at all. But this was the symbol, and still is the symbol of the Antietam National Cemetery. Every once in a while, there are some human remains found on battlefields. I think the last one I heard about was at Gettysburg in '96. but other battlefields also have them. Back in the 80s, late 80s, 88 or 89, I believe it was, there were 4 sets of remains found out on the sunken road. Turned out to be, after they did a forensic analysis of the bodies and the things that were found with them, that they were 4 members of the Irish Brigade. And they were brought back and buried in this common grave together. Here's the plaque. I'll let you read it as we go here. But they were brought in, and I think one of them was tentatively identified, but the other 3, am I correct, Matt? You aware of that? I thought they'd be able to, they thought they may have been able to identify one of the 4, but nothing definite. And the other 3, they had no idea. But this is where they were buried, and they're together again. This is the unknown section in the cemetery. You can see the graves coming up along here. Every once in a while, you'll see a little taller one. You see a few that are above the others. Some of them are sunken, so that's part of it. But they used a different stone after 1902. So all the burials are after 1902 have a higher stone. But there are about 4,800, I believe, total graves in Antietam Cemetery, and about a third of those are unknowns. And as I said earlier, probably a few of them were Confederate that we don't know. This is a typical stone in Antietam. Several Union or national cemeteries have stones like this, not all of them. 2 numbers on, not all of them have 2 numbers, but the ones that have 2 numbers, the upper number is the grave number, which is standard in any cemetery. You can't in unknown see who's there, but you can identify that as a grave site. But the 5 represents the number of bodies in that particular plot. There are 5 sets of remains in there. Usually that's because they didn't find much, and they combined them. When a body was intact, of course, it got its own plot. But for the most part, if they weren't intact, and many of them weren't, and many of them had been buried in mass graves to begin with, so they were intermingled. You'll see a number like 5. The highest number I remember seeing was at Fredericksburg as 10, but there might be others that have even more than that. But that's again, not at every cemetery, but many of them have that. So that concludes what I wanted to go over with you, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions you might have.
Jim, if we do have any questions, the museums ask that you just repeat the question so that they can hear it on the.
I will do that.
I'll start off actually. In regards to what drove you to collect these human interest stories more than doing another battle study or something like that?
Well, we initially, when we wrote our first book together, we didn't even plan to write a book. As I said, Suzanne and I have been going to, the first one that we wrote together was about Gettysburg, and we've been going there for years, and that's our kind of favorite, our favorite thing that we focus on. We like human interest stories because you can read strategies and tactics and generals and all that. We want to hear what happened to the little guy and what he experienced and what the people of the town might have experienced. And so we just started not intentionally, but gathering those. And we decided we had so many of them, we wanted to share them. And that's when we did the Gettysburg book. And then it became a second volume. And then we thought, well, let's do Antietam because that's kind of a cool place too. And that's actually how we ended up getting these human interest stories. No particular reason other than that. We just like them. Yes?
Do you have any idea how old Burnside Bridge is and how old that sycamore is?
The question is, how old is the sycamore at the Burnside Bridge? It was a sapling at the time of the battle. That's about as much as I can tell you. I'm not an arborist, so I don't know how long it takes a tree to grow, but it's at least 159 plus whatever the number of years it is to go from a seedling to a sapling.
Do you know how old the bridge itself is or when it was built?
Do you know, Matt, the bridge was built when?
1836.
I was going to say 1836. Thank you. No, I wasn't. I thought I could pull that off, though. You know? Anybody else? Yes.
Was the bridge completely rebuilt a couple years ago?
The bridge was rebuilt a couple years ago, yes. It's just reopened about a year ago, I'm thinking?
I think 3 at this point.
Is it, oh, time flies when you get to be 80 years old. Yes, another question.
Okay, here's anybody on the roof. How did he get the nickname Old Simon?
How did he get the nickname of Old Simon? Anybody know? I've heard a story that it was given by the school children, but I don't know if that's factual or not. Is it?
That's the story I know. Kevin, you might be able to back me up on this one.
Yeah, that's what I've heard too, is school kids.
Yeah.
From Sharpsburg.
Yeah.
From what we understand, Old Simon was named after a popular school or a children's book character called
Okay.
Simon the Pure.
Okay.
He was an all-white character, and when Old Simon first got put up, it was this dazzling white marble. And so the kids started calling him Old Simon.
Okay.
That's supposedly the story.
Okay. I'm going to repeat the question now that the answer's gone. I forgot to do that for the benefit of the... So the question was, how did Old Simon get his name? So you may have heard the answers. We'll do answers first, and then we'll ask the question. It's easier to get the answer right that way. You can make up a question to fit the answer. Anybody else? Yes?
So does your interest, you talked about Gettysburg and Antietam, do you do other battlefields?
We haven't written about any other battlefields. I've written about other battles. My first book was The Escape from Libby Prison out of Richmond, and then I did a book on the Battle of Newmarket, the cadets from VMI, and then I did one on the battle between the Alabama and the Kearsarge. I've done a book on Arlington National Cemetery. I kind of stepped out of the Civil War genre for a while because I go to Arlington quite a bit, and I felt those stories needed to be told. There were parts of the cemetery that I would go to that there was nobody around. I'd be by myself for hours, and I thought, these people have nobody, no families or anybody to come and visit. Nobody knows what they did, so I picked, again, 200 or so of my favorite stories from Arlington National Cemetery and put that in there. So most of the things we've done have been Civil War. The latest one I did was on field hospitals and aid stations at Gettysburg. But yeah, we go around, we talk all over the East Coast. We've gone as far north as West Point, New York, and as far south as Atlanta, westward to Cincinnati. So we've covered pretty much the eastern seaboard in meeting with Civil War roundtables and historical societies. But long answer to a short question, we go all the battlefields we can get to.
So do you limit your scope to just Civil War? Is that what you say you looked at others?
Pretty much. The question, did we limit our scope to the Civil War? And the answer to that is pretty much. My son has a very strong interest in World War II history, so I've kind of taken on some of that by assimilation just from hearing him talk, but I've never done any work on that area, and Suzanne hasn't either. Suzanne is doing research on Civil War quilts, so she's kind of branching out into something that, quite frankly, I don't have any interest in, but I'll probably help her. But I can say that here because there's, 50 feet between us. But yeah, Civil War is kind of our focus. We like that. Anyone else?
John, did you have any online questions?
Yeah, we did have one from Blake Miller. He asked about what was the term of service for doctors in the Union Army, which is not something that I know. I'd be curious if anyone could hear those.
What was the term of service?
Yeah, the term of service, the
Length of service? It varied. It varied quite a bit. There were a number of doctors, actually you think doctors are safe. There were 13 doctors that were wounded just at Gettysburg, and one was killed. So they had a life expectancy a little shorter than they normally would have had in private practice. If they would stay in, they would go for the duration. Many of them only signed up for a short period of time. There were a lot of volunteered physicians at some of the bigger battles. Not very highly thought of by the regular doctors. They thought they only came to eat the free food and cut something off. and they said they didn't really feel like they did a good job as far as treating, so they didn't last very long. But the duration of service or time of service for a physician varied greatly. Depended a lot on the corps that they were in and the division and so on.
And one final question.
Yes.
You had a particular, seem to have a particular interest in flag bearers. Were there any other positions that you were particularly interested in?
Okay, the question was, we had a focus on our talk here was on flag bearers. That was coincidental, by the way. And he asked if I had any other areas that we concentrated on, and really, no. It just seemed to happen here at Antietam that there were flag bearers emphasized a little bit more than a lot of other places. Many battlefields were the same, and you can get good flag bearer stories just about anywhere. But no, I didn't really look at anything in particular. Suze, did you do any particular thing either? Yeah, we didn't really. Like I said, it was coincidental. They're all tough guys, though. I wouldn't have wanted to be one. Anyone else?